Welcome to the Black Male Impact. Today we have as guest Dr. Walter McCollum. Dr. McCollum, welcome to the Black Male Impact.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cross. It's good to be here.
Yes, but before we get into the conversation, I'll just share a little about Dr. McCollum. He's the president of McCollum Enterprises. He's also a Fulbright recipient and also an Air Force veteran. But I will give Dr. McCollum the opportunity to share more with you so you can know more about who he is before we get into the conversation. Dr. McCollum, please share.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Cross. Yeah, so I grew up in Union County, South Carolina, small town in Union, about 27,000 population. Grew up in a single family household, but I had my village. I'm so very grateful I had the village. I had my dad, his parents, his grandparents, but I also had my mother's mother and my grandparents on my mother's side. I went into the Air Force when I was 17 to pretty much escape my environment. I had so many negative vices in the community. You know, my mother had an addiction. She suffered domestic violence. So that was the best decision for me. And I lived in different countries when I was in the Air Force. I had the honor of living in the Philippines. I lived in Turkey. And from the Air Force, well, before I got out of the Air Force, my last assignment in the Air Force, I was at the Pentagon. I worked for former Secretary of Defense Bill Cohen on his executive staff. And then I transitioned into corporate America. I worked for some of the top multinational corporations like Lockheed Martin, Booz Allen and Hamilton, Capgemini, SAIC, Sodexo. And in the interim, I developed my own management consulting practice, as well as my nonprofit organization. And from there, post my corporate career, I transitioned into higher education, and where I've served as a faculty member, a dean, a vice president, and a chancellor.
And that's awesome. You have worked in several different spaces, from military services to education to corporate America. So the experience you have is broad. So you have gained a lot of knowledge, because a lot of times we gain more from our experiences than just reading and just going to school. So you have a plethora of experiences from those different areas that you have served, which is great. And especially serving as in the military, Air Force. So that's really impressive. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go straight into the questions, and we know we will get to touch back on some of the things that you have done over your course of experiences in those different spaces. And so my first question is, what is the mindset that it takes to make a positive impact?
Yes, I think when we think about making a positive impact, the mindset really has to be connected to selflessness. We have to realize, number one, that we were put here on earth to impact change, to serve in some way, whether it's on a micro level or a macro level. We can also think about our frames of reference, what we've been through in our lives, the scenarios that we are in, and we have to sometimes make changes internally. We have to make changes externally. So I think once we realize that, that gives us the gumption to tackle change head on. One of the things that we do as Black men oftentimes is that we store things in our memory bank. We lock the door, we throw away the key. And then when we move into adulthood, sometimes we don't go get the key to unlock the door and tackle those issues head on so that we can progress in life. So I think selflessness and then having the power, or realizing that we have the power within to enact change, whether it's internal or external.
Well, I really appreciate that perspective. And I will go from where selflessness in regards to what we do. A lot of times, based on our environment, as you mentioned, that we need to sometimes go back to our environment, the things that we have been through, to realize why we may act the way we do. And as you mentioned, as men, we sometimes store away in our mind the experiences, and we don't go back. And sometimes what we haven't addressed will sometimes affect us later in life. So I really appreciate that perspective. And I know the men that's listening, or just anyone that's listening, can pass the information on to others. I will really appreciate that perspective, because sometimes we wonder why we act the way we do in our adult life, not realizing that we had experience or experiences that we didn't really address. We experienced it, but we didn't really unpack it to see how that will affect us in our adulthood. So I really appreciate that perspective. So I'll go into my next question. What advice do you have for the men listening, and how they can play a role in creating positive change?
Yeah. Yeah, I think when we look at change and understand that we have the power to enact it, one of the things in terms of advice that I would offer is that we have to realize that change is really needed across the entire ecosystem, whether that's politically, whether that is educationally, religiously. We have to really find the niche. First, we have to identify and understand the fact that we have power and we have a purpose and we have passion. And I want to key in on passion and how important that is to align to a niche that we have access to. For example, we have some men who are business owners, very successful. And some of the things that they're doing in communities, they actually go out and develop mentor protege programs with small business owners so that those business owners can be successful and optimize their business outcomes. And one of the things that I've done in my career is I've chosen education, and purposely for Black men. I had a personal mission when I started in education, and that was to increase the number of Black males with doctoral degrees.
Oh, wow.
And throughout my academic career, I'm honored to say that I have chaired over 100 dissertation committees,
Wow.
and 75% have been Black men to successfully complete their doctoral degree. So it starts with passion, and then aligning with a niche that you can connect to impact that particular change that you're ascertaining to do.
Man, and that's great. And also congratulations on fulfilling that mission that you wanted to, with more Black men becoming doctors, getting their doctoral degree. That is impressive. And before I even go back to what you have said about passion and how important that is, I can remember when I started my journey, I was looking to see how many Black males are successful and have doctoral degree. And to my surprise, we had more Black males with doctoral degree than society sometimes lets you think. But to know that we are doing it, we are achieving the goals despite the limitations that society put on us, man, that is impressive. And to hear that 75% of over 100 students that you have helped to attain their doctoral degree are Black men, that's impressive. And I know the younger generation will really appreciate that and know that achieving a doctoral degree is in reach. It's what I'm saying, because sometimes they don't think it is in reach.
That's right.
Having the right guidance and support, as you did, to help others really help. But to go back to creating a positive change, and you mentioned passion, that is important, because to do the work that matters, to do the work that create opportunity, to do the work that create an impact, it's going to take effort. It's going to take.
That's right.
So if you're not passionate about it, as soon as you get to a point where you are challenged, you may end up quitting. So the passion is what really push you through the challenging moments, because as we on this journey, we're going to face challenges. It doesn't matter how motivated you are or how knowledgeable you are, but the passion for what you do push you through those tough, challenging moments. And I really appreciate that perspective, because a lot of times people miss it. You can choose something to do. Once you have the passion for it, you align yourself with that thing and you give it your all. And because we don't have to do everything, we can choose what may become easy, or what we have the love for as we continue on this journey. So I really, appreciate that perspective. That leads me to my next question. How can we, as Black men, help to change the narrative?
Okay, good. That's a really good question. And I was excited to hear that because one of the books that I wrote was Black Men Changing the Narrative Through Education.
Oh, wow.
And I wrote that in 2018.
Man, that's awesome.
I had an opportunity to chronicle the lives of 20 Black men with PhDs and how they were using their education to change the world. So I think that we can change that narrative by being intentional and being deliberate in terms of how we show up as Black men, how we show up in the communities, how we show up as fathers, how we show up in the workplace, because we know that we have negative narratives that are associated with us. Mm-hmm. We're ostracized. Sometimes there's racial profiling, discrimination. But I think once we are intentional and deliberate and put forth the effort to assess where we are, looking at our shortcomings, looking at our strengths, our weaknesses, developing those weaknesses with our strengths, integrating with different groups, men's support groups, church ministries. Yeah. I've been in men's ministry for most of my life, supporting men's ministry, working with ministers. And I tell you, it was such an honor to work with Black men, to empower each other, to support each other, to lift each other up. So I think once we understand how we're showing up, that gives us the credence to enact change within ourselves.
Well, and thanks for, again, for that perspective. I believe it is important, especially becoming a part of other organizations or joining groups that we have the affinity with. Because as men, we too need the support and the strength to continue on our journey, to do the best that we can. As they say, iron sharpens iron. So it's being a part of those groups that sometimes will help us to go through everyday life, because we all need insights and perspective of others. And sometimes that's what will help us to be the best version of ourselves. Learning from others. Don't think we can do this thing by ourselves. And sometimes based on how we grew up, again, we may think that, oh, no, we're not going to be a part or share the challenges, but being in those, are part of those organizations or groups can help you or help us to be more vulnerable in a sense where we can talk about the challenges, not only the successes, because sometimes we think it's only the success that we need to talk about, but we can also talk about the challenges that we experience. But as you mentioned, that when it comes to creating change or changing the narrative, we have to be intentional and deliberate. Because if we're not intentional, the stereotypes are and the labels are still going to be there. And so we have to be mindful, as you mentioned, how we show up. And that's one thing that I really challenge myself to do, like being on campus with my students. I'm there in a suit every day. So some students maybe wonder, man, why are you doing this? When we have dress down days, you're still in suits and stuff like that. But I said, especially the Black males, I know what society says about us. I'm here to show you something different. And we have to be intentional and deliberate, because living, as you mentioned, you have to be selfless. You have to know that you are here to serve a purpose. And you choose, as you mentioned, what is it I'm going to do? And a part of that is to make sure when I'm in this space with especially students, I show them, not just tell them what they need to do and how they need to show up in life. And so I know you shared a lot about the experiences that you have had from your careers, but this next question is, what or who has inspired and influenced you to pursue the path that you're on?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I really had to reflect over my life. And I just realized how much my late grandfather, paternal grandfather, had on my life. And really, he was the one that the key influence because, he only had a fourth grade education.
Wow.
And something that he told me that resonated with me, he said, I want you to get all of the education that you can because there will be endless possibilities, there will be limitless opportunities, and just go for it. And I want you to settle with what I had at the bare minimum, but I still was able to retire from Draper Corporation after 40 years. So that was inspiring for me, and he really influenced. And I think that is why I'm so very passionate about impact and change in the world, is through my grandfather, but also my father. My father's love for Christ. I mean, he was a deacon from the time I can remember, 3 years old, up until he passed in December.
Wow. My
And
condolences to you.
just the demonstration of seeing him submit to God and be faithful and obedient, and just his love for God. So he was a true inspiration for me. But when I look at my academic career, it was actually a female. It was Dr. Marilyn Simon. I saw how she worked with African American males. I remember having challenges in my doctoral program, and she worked with me behind the scenes, and she was not even on my committee. And I wanted to feel the way, I wanted other men to feel the way that I felt when someone invested in me. I wanted to have that same level of impact. So she started mentoring me once I earned my doctoral degree. We even published books together, worked on projects together. And some of the characteristics and traits that I exhibit really are from her, just showing true commitment, empathy, compassion, some of those soft skills that a lot of men don't really use because we haven't really experienced it. And once I exhibited some of those same traits, I was able to have the same impact, which is why I'm sought after around the world at the doctoral level. People are asking, Dr. McCollum, I want you to be my mentor on my committee. And sometimes I have to turn them down, but I try to support as many Black men as humanly possible because I know what that impact does when someone invests.
Man, and thanks for sharing that because that's important. Not just the experience you have with your mentor and how the mentor helped you so you can help others, but to have the compassion and the empathy for others, as you mentioned, that we sometimes don't exercise those emotions or
That's right.
understanding because we didn't really experience it or get the opportunity to experience it because
Yes,
we were told at times you got to be tough.
that's
You
right.
need to be compassionate. You not to be out here being soft and stuff like that. But we realize how important that is now because that's one of the things that they have been talking about, especially with emotional intelligence, how that affects Black men in particularly because some of us grew up in an environment where we not being compassionate is not really embraced. You got
Yeah.
to go through life. But to go back to your father and your mom and the different experiences that really, and your grandfather especially, that tell you, even though he didn't, but his life experience showed him that education is valuable. So then he makes sure he let you know that education is valuable because, sorry, the generation or his generation or prior didn't have all the access that we have today. And a
Yeah.
lot of those parents knew the value of education, but it just didn't get the opportunity to go. So for him to really instill that in you early, and as you mentioned, I just want to kind of go over. I see your father serving as a minister or as a deacon, serve as that influence and inspiration because in the church it kind of helped you to be a bit more understanding or compassionate for others because you
Yeah.
learn to treat people well, as they say, when you're growing up, you want to treat people as Christ treat others. So you kind of learn in that environment to be a bit more understanding and compassionate to others. So I really appreciate you sharing that. But one thing that I would also mention that you said that the person that helped you wasn't a Black male to get on that journey of your PhD. And we sometimes have to understand that it's not always going to be a Black male in our corner. And so we have to be open to learn from the individuals that. Yes, and thanks for your perspective on the previous question. I'm going to go into the next question. What is your perspective on the current climate of Black men in society today?
Yeah, that's a real good question. And in fact, I've been in many conversations where that has come up. My perspective is very positive, and it's really positive because I looked at some research, and in 2021, the Census Bureau came out with some research, and 52% of Black men over the age of 25, they had been to college. And then when we look at bachelor's degrees or higher education, actually the rate has increased from 18% to 22% since 2021. So we see that there's a huge impact in education at large when it pertains to Black men. But we have some areas that we need to work on. In fact, when we talk about employment, of course, Black men fared at 69% compared to 79% of all males. And then, of course, as you know, when we look at healthcare, health issues and conditions and the disparity, Black men, we are at the top of every condition. And also, when we talk about and we look at areas in terms of, we disaggregate the data from education, for example, and drill down, we see more men in blue-collar jobs than white-collar jobs because of the opportunities. So there are so many areas that we have opportunities for improvement. But one of the things that I'd like to capitalize on is I'm very impressed at what I'm seeing in terms of what the historically Black colleges and universities are doing, from the White House to the classroom, and from the classroom to the community. Every form of legislation, policies, regulatory requirements, innovative programming. Leaders in HBCUs are at the forefront. So that's making a huge impact. But I think when we look at some of the other areas like incarceration, for example, there are so many restorative justice programs and organizations that's in place right now, and they are boots on the ground and they are seeing impact. So I think if we continue that great work in the community and with those organizations, we will see a shift in recidivism over time, and also the perpetual issue that we have around prison reentry. And then I think when we look at healthcare, when we look at some of the health conditions that we're subjected to as Black men, I think there's an opportunity for us to come together and provide customized and tailored programming for Black men in the community. And that starts with screening, free screening services, a holistic approach to healing from a resource perspective. So men can actually go to one place. Correct. That's what I found in mentoring and working with men over the years is if you provide the resources and they're all in one place, you'll have a line of men.
That's right.
But if men have to go to multiple places, it's not going to happen. So I'm very optimistic and I'm hopeful that we are on the right track and the right path. But I think we have to continue to come together in unison and in unity to support the trajectory of Black men and the rise in all of those areas based upon the systemic factors that we are subjected to.
That's great. That's great perspective, I should say, from us working together for one. But also you said something that I really trying to get my mind to get back to. But as you mentioned, it is the positive. You mentioned that the good things that are happening that Black men are doing, which is important because a lot of times when we talk about Black men, the focus first goes to the deficit, what we're doing well. And you have mentioned where we have increased in education and in bachelor's degrees. and just overall where we are doing great work. And the more we talk about the great things that we're doing, the more it inspires the next generation. Because if we talk always about the negative, that's what they're going to hear. They need to hear the positives so they can have something to relate to that will help them to see beyond their environment, their condition, whatever they're experiencing. So the more we talk about the positives, the more we will inspire the next generation. And you mentioned about restorative justice. And coming from a criminal justice background myself, I realized how important the restorative justice is, because it's not just to send these young people to jail, but teach them the impact of crime. Because if they grow up in an environment and that's all they see, they may think that's what they need to do. But teach them the impact of crime will help to steer them in a different direction. And sometimes you often find that that's what happened. These young people get to realize, oh, this is not helping me. It's not helping my family. It's not helping my community. Help them to go into a different direction. So I really appreciate you sharing those different perspectives on what we can do as we move forward in society as Black men. My next question is, what change do you want to see in general and amongst Black men?
Yes. So when we look at the climate of the world today, there's so much going on in different countries around Israel. And we look at the different challenges that we have in terms of the United States and our responsibilities to those countries. So when I look at the word community, unity is embedded in that word. So the change that I would like to see, generally speaking, for the world is that nations come together in unity to respect the differences that different countries in the United States in particular have religiously, socially, again, and then politically. And I think when I think about what I'd like to see for Black men, it really is Black men coming together. And you said earlier, iron sharpens iron. And once we realize that and actually internalize it, socialize it, implement it, and work together with all brothers, all men, because all brothers and all men have specific needs that are uniquely designed for them. Oftentimes we have groups of men that sort of work together within their own groups to build communities and social networks, et cetera. But I think once we begin to move beyond that, and we look at coming together to build coalitions that's all inclusive, no matter what a man's frame of reference is, no matter what a man's social identity, sexual orientation is. The whole is greater than the sum of its individual parts. So when you bring all of that together, all of the uniqueness and those views and perspectives, points of view, skills, competencies, values, principles, oh, how good how good this world will be, right?
Greater things will happen because people will feel empowered.
That's right.
Once Black men are empowered, greater things will happen because those barriers, those limitations, we will overcome those limitations. Because innately, we all have something of value to contribute. And if you're not empowered, you're not going to contribute the best of you to humanity. And to move the needle forward, the best of who you are have to be shared with the world. And when you're empowered, you'll be able to share the best of you with society. So I believe that coming together is really important, despite our different experiences, our background, or how we socialize. But to move the needle forward, it's important that we work collectively to breaking those barriers or those generational strongholds that have prevent us from getting to spaces that we would normally, because there are many of us who are in positions of power. Is to know how we're going to use those positions to help each other to go forward. So I really appreciate that perspective on what we need to do, because we have to play a part in the change that we want to see. Yes, we know that we don't have the keys to everything, but we have to play our part. And if we operate in as a group, collective, we can get more done because they know that the strength will be there, and we are here to support each other. And once that's happened, we will get further than we are today. So I really appreciate that perspective. And that leads me to my next question. What was a pivotal moment in your life?
Yeah. I have to go back to my faith, if I may. So growing up in the church for me, growing up, being baptized when I was 7 years old, but I don't think I really accepted Christ in totality until I was in the military. I was in a third world country in the Philippines. And if you can imagine or envision a 19-year-old being sent to the Philippines, and he was broken before he went there because of all of the vices that he had to experience growing up. It was very difficult. And so I got over there. I mean, I tell you, I was partying hard, drinking excessively, and lost myself. I even ended up in correctional custody for 30 days.
Wow.
And I tell you, I was in the hospital on my back looking up. And I said, God, if you just restore my soul, my spirit, so that I can just get back on my feet, I can promise you that for the rest of my life, right? That was the history of it. And the rest was history. I mean, I held onto my faith for the rest of my life, and I was able to do some great things. So I wouldn't be who I am today had it not been for my faith. So that's one thing. Another thing I'd like to share is really when I was appointed and accepted a Fulbright scholar in my career, because you don't really find people that had a background or a frame of reference, such as mine, coming from where I came from, that was accepted as a Fulbright scholar, but being accepted the very first time as a Fulbright scholar. So I'm very proud of all of that. But I would have to say my faith and having a strong foundation, that was my pivotal point to get me back on track to be the person that I am today.
And thanks for sharing that experience. And sometimes it's in our tough moments we realize how important some of the things that we have been taught is. So it's important.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, it's in when you felt down, when you find yourself in a tough situation, you have to draw back on what you have already known. But sometimes if we don't get those type of experience, which is not the most favorable, we may just continue and just be, as they would say, lukewarm.
That's right.
Go through the process, but sometimes we need those experience, not knowing that we do, but it put us back on track, especially when it comes to being a Christian and stuff like that. Those tough, challenging situations really show you the power of God. And in those moments, you get to realign with just being that person who know the value of Christ and stuff like that. So, and thanks for sharing that experience. And because a lot of people sometimes forget that they can say, God, look, man, I have messed up.
That's right.
Give me a second chance.
That's right.
And I will do the best going
That's right.
forward. Because nothing is wrong with asking for forgiveness for your own mistake, because we all are human beings. We make mistakes, but it's to acknowledge and realize that, we're going to do the best we can as we go forward. So I appreciate you sharing that. My next question is, what life lesson have you learned late in life that you believe is important and can benefit this current generation?
Good question. I think when I look at my life again later in life, the greatest lesson for me was knowing and understanding my value and my worth.
Yeah.
Because again, I think as Black men, oftentimes based upon our experiences, we can be trapped. We can be trapped in a place where we hold on to this victim mentality, or we can be trapped in a space where we settle for complacency and mediocrity. Value and worth. It's not until that point that we can actually excel to our maximum potential
Okay.
And sometimes we can even flourish and go off into different paths that we didn't even know existed for our lives. And in doing so, it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of risk taking. It also takes a lot of work through healing. And I talked a little bit earlier on about sometimes you have to go back to get through. And there are many different areas that we called taboo growing up, and for men, Black men particularly. And you know what those are,
Yeah.
going through counseling, therapy, support groups, or having conversations to show that you have empathy.
Yeah.
Those just were not things that we did. And I had to actually put in the work and acquire those skills. And one of the things, and I want to share the short story, one of the things that I was able to do when we talk about, you mentioned emotional intelligence earlier, because I was wise beyond my years, and I knew that emotional intelligence was important. We didn't even have that language when I was
Correct.
growing up. But I actually became a certified emotional intelligence mentor for corporate C-suite executives in
Wow.
the 90s, in the 90s.
Wow.
And that is when we had presidents of corporations, primarily white male, from Ivy League universities that could not relate to their workforce, and they didn't understand why there was a revolving door, and why they were wasting so much money just retraining and training and hiring. And through my consulting work, I was able to work with a couple of organizations that were focused on diversity in its early stages. They didn't understand why people of color were hired, but they stayed no longer than 3 weeks on the job. And it was because of the cultural disconnect.
Right.
So that was a risk that I was taking at that time, but I wanted to develop skills and competencies because I knew that it would change the narrative for myself in terms of how I showed up and how I could impact change in the world.
Well, as you mentioned, and you were talking about the different experiences, but when it comes to adjusting to an environment, there are
Yep.
certain things that you will have to do. But as you mentioned, what you want to share with, especially younger generation, especially as Black men, mentoring and counseling
Yep.
is something that it is becoming a little bit more prevalent now,
Yep.
where you find Black men are openly talking about going to therapy, going for
Yeah.
counseling, and going just to talk about the challenges that they're dealing with. So that is important. That is a great perspective to share with the next generation. But as you mentioned, with your experience, and the companies didn't realize why these people are leaving. And it's,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, they didn't understand how to make the adjustment or connection with the environment or with the people. And if you're
Yeah.
not able to connect with the people, then you're not going to have a successful experience.
Yes.
So that is important. And it's great that you had that experience earlier, even
Yeah.
before it becomes common knowledge,
Right.
because most people just recently start hearing about emotional intelligence and how it is that we connect with people and how important that is, and what may cause us not to make those connections with people who are different. But
Yeah.
because culturally, as you have mentioned, that a
Yeah.
lot of people didn't really learn how to deal with people, but
Yeah.
and even your own people at times, because our experiences are different. You may be wondering why this person act this way and why this person act this way, because their experiences are different. And then if we're not understanding, then we're not able to make the connection to have what you call it now, a successful relationship within our workspace and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that is important. So, but before we get to the end of the conversation, which this is really a great conversation, you have shared a lot of information that I believe is beneficial to all of us. I know you have shared some things that I can take away and add to, as they would say, my toolbox as I go forward
Yeah.
on my journey. But before we get to the last question, I want to know, where can the listeners find you and help support the work that you are doing to make a difference?
Yeah. Actually, I can be found on McCollum Enterprises, LLC.com.
Okay.
That's my consulting practice where I work with different clients in change management, education, organizational development, quality management. And McCollum Foundation.org, and that's McCollum Foundation.org, and that's my nonprofit organization where I work with different countries, Haiti particularly, but starting to do some work in Ghana,
Okay.
also in LinkedIn, Walter McCollum. So that's how you can find me.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that. I will definitely put that in the description so the listeners, or when they're reading what is put out there, they can find you and connect with you. So thank you for sharing that. And also, I will ask my final question because I tell you this conversation was really great. But what impact do you want to have on the world?
That's a really good question when I think about it. And then I go back to our conversation earlier and talking about being selflessness or selfless through selflessness practices. My thought process for this question is the same. So when I talk about my impact that I want to have on the world, it's really through others. And it's through all of those doctors that I talked about that I've graduated, but the ones that are coming up that I will be graduating, and it's really through their groundbreaking research, science, technology, innovation in other countries around the world.
Man, that's awesome. Once, as you mentioned, selflessness. I think once we approach life with that mindset, will make a difference. Because what we're here to do is serve others.
Yeah.
And we have to accept that if we're going to have a fulfilling life, because yeah, you have people out there who have accumulate a lot of money and
Yeah.
then realize that, oh, it's not only about the money, they still feel empty. And
That's right.
some get to the point where they realize that helping or finding something that they are passionate about outside of work that helps humanity, that touches people,
Right.
the thing for them that fill that void.
Yeah.
A lot of people, man, think it's the money, but it's actually helping people, and becoming selfless gives you that kind of feeling that
Right.
I'm actually making an impact
Yep.
world. And if you find that thing that you're passionate about, it could be helping young people, it could be helping homeless people, it could be whatever it is that you find an interest in. So important that you give yourself to it, and because that gives you meaning, that gives you purpose.
That's
And
right.
once we are on purpose and living a meaningful life, life becomes better. So I really appreciate you sharing that, especially the part about being selfless, because that's something sometimes what we need to remember, and how important that is as we live our own lives. And but Dr. McCollum, man, it's a pleasure having you here on the Black Male Impact. Do you have any final words that you want to share?
In fact, I do want to just highlight, if I can, and go back to you mentioned being fulfilled. And once you're fulfilled and it's connected to your passion, you can have a greater impact. And to that end, one of the things that I'm working on now is I was just appointed to the National Board of Directors for Fulbright Association. So I was appointed, I was a Fulbrighter in 2019, and I had the opportunity to go to Amman, Jordan, to advise the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research on hiring practices for university presidents, and also write the recommendations that would go into the congressional academic mandate for hiring for the entire Kingdom of Jordan. And that work was expanded during COVID. I was on the board of directors for the National Capital Region Fulbright Association in Washington, D.C. And during that time, COVID, everything was shut down. We had to find a way where we could still bridge to mutual understanding in Fulbright. So I founded the very first virtual Fulbright chapter in its 45-year history.
Oh, wow.
So that scholars and researchers around the world could continue the great work of Fulbright. And I've just made a lifelong commitment to the Fulbright organization because its mission is just only about change. It's about building those mutual understanding relationships with different nations. But more importantly, it's about advancing knowledge in communities and changing lives and improving lives around the world. And that's what this is about, positive change, right? Providing those opportunities to effect change in different nations, different communities, but individually within those communities. So I'm just honored to have the opportunity to do that work. And because it is fulfilling, and I think it'll be fulfilling for me continuously as I do the work long term.
And to be or to feel fulfilled is important, and to be doing something that we are passionate about is important, because we'll be more effective. We'll go the extra mile. We'll give more of ourselves. We'll be more positive or optimistic about the work once we are passionate about it, and we see the value in it, as you mentioned, because seeing the value in the work itself will give you that extra drive to show up and do the best that you can to make sure you are effective in doing the work itself. But I know there's a lot more that we could talk about because I know, especially with your experience, and there is a lot that we could cover in a conversation, which I know will be beneficial to the listeners. But we may be able to do that at some other time where we dive deeper, especially in leadership, because really appreciate your perspective on leadership, being that you have different experience and different role as leaders in different careers. But, I'll say it was great having you here on the Black Male Impact. It was a pleasure to hearing your perspective and knowledge. And thanks for sharing with us and with everyone that was on this or listening to us during this conversation. So, Dr. McCollum, it's a pleasure to have you here on the Black Male Impact.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. And listeners, as always, our goal is to bring to you guests that we believe will share knowledge and insights and perspective that we all can use as we continue on this journey. So for us here at the Black Male Impact, we appreciate your support and thanks for your continuous support. Please like and share this video with anyone you believe would benefit from it. As always, our goal is to bring to you information that will inspire you to be the best version of yourself. Thanks again for being here on the Black Male Impact.